Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Gonzalez-Rojas. I'm a candidate for New York State Assembly in the 34th Assembly District. I'm super excited about tonight's conversation as we have a dynamic roundtable of leaders and activists and organizers and elected officials who are at the forefront of the LGBTQ movement here in Queens. So before we get started, for folks who are in the Zoom, we do have simultaneous interpretation in Spanish. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Melina to explain. Melina, vamos a explicar sobre la traducción en español.
Ok, buenas noches. Para todos aquellos que desean interpretación, presionen donde dice participants o los participantes y a su mano derecha le va a salir una imagen donde dice todos los nombres que son todos los participantes y en la esquina derecha abajo hay un botón donde dice raise hand o levanta la mano, lo presiona y vamos a saber que lo mandamos al otro cuarto para que usted pueda escuchar toda la interpretación del seminario.
Gracias, Melina. Great. So thank you all again for joining. We are on the cusp of Pride 2020, and it's certainly going to be a very different Pride than years past. And I think what's important to remember about Pride is that it is a moment of celebration, but it's also a moment in which we want to honor the legacy of LGBTQ leaders and many of the lives lost in violence and discrimination that so many in our communities have faced. So Pride often has sort of mixed emotions, but we also want to take the time to talk about the issues that deeply impact the LGBTQIA community, and specifically here in Queens, where we have the most diverse community in the world, I would argue, and actually the second largest Pride celebration in New York City. So I'm super excited to have the following activists, organizers, and leaders join us. We have Daniel Puerto, Mohamed Amin, Q Amin. We have Vianney Garcia. And we also have our wonderful council member and longtime activist, Danny Dromm. So I today just released my own platform on LGBTQIA policies. And it includes everything from decriminalizing sex work to advancing gender-affirming policies in healthcare and in jails and prisons and with IDs, advancing LGBTQ-friendly education policies and support for students, and ensuring that we have dignified housing for LGBT communities, both homeless youth and our seniors, to ensure that they have access to dignified housing in which they can where we all can thrive. So I'm super excited that we were able to roll out that platform in advance of Pride and have this conversation about the issues that impact the diverse LGBTQIA communities here in Queens. So I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Danny Dromm to say a few remarks. I am deeply honored and humbled to have received his support last week. Like the time, I'm not sure what day it is, but it was last week, but I'm just incredibly grateful for your support, council member, and you know, our longtime friendship and advocacy together in our community. So I'll turn it over to you to say a few words to get us started.
Sure. Well, thank you, Jessica. It's great to be here with you and also with Mohamed Q Amin, an activist and a outspoken gay rights leader within the Muslim and within the Muslim community and within the Richmond Hill community area over there, the Caribbean equality community. With Daniel also, I've worked with Daniel on many different projects and through Make the Road, and now of course he's with Sage. And also with BNA through Make the Road as well, but with the work that she has done with our trans community. So I think it's really great that we are here tonight with these three folks as well. But, you know, I'm here tonight to endorse you and to tell people why I've endorsed you. And I'm very proud to, you know, to join Tiffany Caban in endorsing you. But like you said, I've known you for maybe almost 25 years now, and I know the type of person you are. I know the leadership that you've provided in the community. I got to know you, I guess it was right before you became state committee woman, and it was the same time that I was running for district leader. And your activism has continued ever since then. You've been an expert in the health field, in the health area, and you have been a good, dear friend of the LGBT community. Even when you were working with, you know, in the Latino Planned Parenthood organization. So there's no question about why both myself and Tiffany have endorsed you. We know that you are the best person for this position. I don't even think that your opponents would dare to come near some of the issues that you're willing to speak out on and to stand up for within our community. And you know, as we move along here tonight in this forum and this workshop, we'll be talking more about that as well. But I think that you are the most qualified, most progressive person in this race, and I feel lucky to be able to say that I endorse you to become the next Assembly woman from the 34th Assembly District. So thank you, Jessica. And, you know, as the founder of Queens Pride, we're going to miss our annual Pride Parade. It'll be the first time in 28 years that we don't have a parade. But I'm so glad that we're having this virtual discussion, because it's not only just about parades, it's about issues. And there are many, many issues that affect our community here, from immigrant rights issues to trans issues to the sex work issues. So I'm really grateful to you for giving us this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny, so much. And I think the thing that's most important to me is that I have the relationships with the leaders on the ground, right? The people who are on the front lines doing this work. And as we think about the vision, how to advance true liberation for the LGBTQI community, that we're really tapping the expertise of those folks who are most impacted directly by those policies, right? Because when folks are most closest to the problems, they hold the solutions. And it's, again, this incredible panel right here. Danny, your own leadership in this field, and your trailblazing that you've done in our community around changing narratives, right? And conversations about what's possible and what kind of world we want for all our communities. So thank you for that. And I'm super excited to have such an amazing panel here. And we'll get into some of the questions that I have. I want to start off by asking, well, Danny, actually, can you maybe start us off with a little bit of the background on the parade, right? I know the story, right? It was actually born out of tragedy. But if you could share a little bit of a brief history of the formation of the parade and some of the movement activism in our community.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that this year will mark the 30th anniversary of the killing of Julio Rivera on the corner of 78th Street and 37th Avenue here in Jackson Heights. And that was a pivotal moment for us in Queens. You know, there was always a large LGBT population in Jackson Heights in particular, maybe Forest Hills as well. But we weren't really out, you know, people kind of knew we were here, we lived here, but when Julio was killed, that really galvanized the community. And people should know that Julio was killed by 3 white supremacist skinheads out hunting, and that was the word that they used for a homosexual to kill. They had attended a party locally here on the other side of Northern Boulevard, and then actually went out searching, and they came across Julio, beat him over the head with a 40-ounce bottle of beer and stabbed him in the back and left him to die in the corner. And also, the parade was founded on the heels of the Children of the Rainbow curriculum controversy. I was a New York City public school teacher for 25 years before being elected to the city council. And I came out in response to my school board's opposition to the Children of the Rainbow curriculum. That was a curriculum that was designed to teach tolerance of all of New York's diverse communities, based on really the killing of African-American men in Brooklyn at the time. It was around the time that Al Sharpton got his start. And those two incidences that really galvanized this community. And I just knew that it was the right time, the right moment for us to define ourselves. I mean, we continue to define ourselves, but we could no longer allow other people to define us, you know, either as those people, those other people. And you know, oftentimes for minority, quote unquote, groups, which we fit into, people try to define us as the other. Oh, you know, she didn't live here for so long. Oh, he's not part of our group. You know, they're different than us. You know, and that is what we were up against in those days, and still continue to be in many, many ways now. So that parade was born out of that tragedy, but we've always managed to make it a good mixture of party and politics. And so that people can come and enjoy themselves as well, but also make a political statement. You just don't wind up at a gay pride parade in most instances. You actually have to think through what the consequences are if you decide to march in a gay pride parade and you're photographed or you wind up in the newspaper or something like that. You're making a political statement. And I think that that is something that's really important to remember. So yeah, I'm really gonna miss the parade. You know, it would have been the 28th one. But circumstances say, you know, because of the pandemic that we can't congregate. So anyway, next year will be better, I'm hoping.
And it will be digital this year, correct?
Yes, there's going to be many digital Pride celebrations. I know that LaGuardia Community College is doing something on Saturday, June 6th, and Queens Pride is doing something on Sunday, June 7th. So stay tuned for details. They're coming up. They're in our emails and on our Twitter accounts and our Facebook accounts. So there'll be a lot going on. There'll be still a lot going on that weekend. Next weekend.
Yeah, it's coming up.
yeah, it's hard to believe.
So one thing I love about Queens Pride in particular, I've been going for so long, and I love how Latino it is. It is such it has an essence of our community, right? This is one of the most diverse communities in the world, and you see the reflection of the cultures in the community. You see the South Asian community, you see the Indo-Caribbean community, you see the Latinx community, the immigrant, like just the sabor, right? The flavor of it. And I think that speaks to some of the activism that is happening locally, specifically around many of our trans communities. So Bianne, I want to turn it over to you to ask, you have been at the forefront of advocacy for sex workers, particularly for those who are Latinx and or immigrants. And while there's still like a lot of work to do, like I'm really excited about how the conversations about sex work have changed over the last few years and are beginning to look different. Can you talk to me about, you know, your work and how you've had to, like, you know, destigmatize sex work, and particularly for those of us that are Latinx or immigrant or trans, and how we, how do you see that conversation changing as we look more towards policy solutions for the community?
Gracias, Jessica, por darme la oportunidad de estar presente el día de hoy, representar a mi comunidad trans, específicamente mujeres trans que hacen trabajo sexual por sobrevivencia. Dani, me alegro muchísimo que hayas endorsado a Jessica. Creo que es la mejor opción que tenemos en este momento, que realmente va a representar a nuestras comunidades de color, las personas que no tenemos como una forma de representación en Albany. Y también Mohamed, Danielito, les mando un gran abrazo. las conversaciones que estamos ahora sí que teniendo cambios, ¿verdad? Poco a poco con políticos que son progresistas en los temas que no se olvidan de las mujeres trans, ha cambiado muchísimo, empezando con la senadora Jessica Ramos, que Make the Wrong Action representó o apoyó en el principio cuando ella empezó. Creo que ha cambiado muchísimo. Daniel, tú y yo trabajamos en el 2012 o 13.
Perdón, Brainy, mil perdones. Perdón por interrumpir a usted. Me gustaría interpretar lo que está diciendo. ¿Es posible que resume su idea para
Sí.
poder yo nombrarlo en inglés? Y le pido que nomás nombre unas 2 oraciones y dar pausa para que yo lo diga en inglés, por favor.
Yeah. Desde el 2012, los arrestos por estar caminando en Roosevelt Avenue eran demasiados.
Since 2012, the arrests that were happening in Jackson Heights were too many.
Como estaba diciendo Daniel, Puerto y yo estábamos trabajando en Se Hace Camino en Nueva York, donde teníamos llamadas de mujeres trans que estaban siendo arrestadas y criminalizadas por el simplemente hecho de caminar por las calles de Roosevelt Avenue.
We received many phone calls criminalizing and reporting women for simply, our trans community folks, for simply walking on Roosevelt Avenue.
Los entrenamientos que hicimos con los precintos 110, 115 realmente son algo que no funcionaron en el tiempo que estuvimos haciendo esos entrenamientos.
The trainings that we did during that time were something that just was not effective.
Teníamos políticos en aquel entonces que en televisión decían que apoyaban a las mujeres trans, pero bajo o tras cámaras eran las mismas personas que mandaban a los policías encubiertos a criminalizar a nuestras comunidades.
At that time, we had politicians that aligned themselves with us and said that they supported us, but in reality, those were the people that were attacking us and undermining us.
La razón es que personalmente apoyé a la senadora Ramos es porque ella empezó a hablar sobre por qué es importante la despenalización del trabajo sexual. Fue la primera vez que una senadora dijo: quiero sentarme a conversar con mujeres trans que hacen trabajo sexual sin necesidad de nosotros pedir esa reunión con ella.
The reason that I supported Senator Ramos is because she was one of the first persons to say and ask our communities directly to sit down and speak with us without us soliciting her to speak about sex work and speak to our trans community without us soliciting her.
La otra razón que también estoy muy feliz de que Tiffany Caban haya endorsado a Jessica González es porque Tiffany Caban impulsó mucho a crear esa visibilidad, la conciencia sobre las mujeres trans que existimos y que somos partes de Queens.
I was so excited to learn and to support along with Tiffany Caban because she recognized the humanity of our trans community.
El trabajo todavía no ha terminado. Existe todavía mucha violencia, mucha discriminación con todo esto que está pasando, lo de COVID-19. Mujeres trans no tienen un empleo. Las personas que hacen trabajo de sobrevivencia están siendo acosadas por sus inquilinos. Mucha falta de comida, alimentación para las mujeres trans. Todavía falta muchísimo por hacer, pero poco a poco y teniendo tanto concejales, senadores y asambleístas que son progresistas y que ponen en su agenda los temas que son LGBT o trans, estamos haciendo bastante.
The work is not done. What's happening with COVID in terms of having to survive, dealing with accusations, and being a community that needs a lot of fundamental elements and fundamental resources. But it's very meaningful to have politicians that have us on the agenda, that recognize the humanity of the LGBTQ community and our trans community. And we're happy to recognize that having politicians that recognize us is a huge step forward.
Hablando en términos de violencia, como se hace camino en Nueva York, hemos registrado más de 26 casos desde el 2016 hasta la fecha. Ustedes saben que cuando estábamos haciendo un documental, mi compañera Norma y yo fuimos rociadas con pepper spray. Ese tipo de violencias, muchas ocasiones las personas que hacen trabajo sexual que están siendo o que son víctimas de ese tipo de violencia no lo reportan, porque desafortunadamente me ha tocado oír acompañar a personas trans que son sobrevivientes de crímenes de odio a los precintos 110, 115, y es muy triste ver cómo la policía no responde correctamente con humanidad, más que nada, no respetando los géneros, no respetando el nombre, y es algo que entristece, pero también a la misma vez me fortalece ver personas que salen a la luz pública diciendo yo apoyo el trabajo sexual, que yo apoyo a las mujeres que hacen trabajo sexual, porque hacer trabajo sexual es un trabajo y no es fácil hacerlo.
En términos de la violencia, ha habido hasta 200, pardon me, in terms of violence, there have been 216 cases up to date. And I have a documentary that I was making with my companion, and I myself have experienced violence being pepper sprayed. This violence is usually not reported. Folks don't report the hate crimes that they suffer. And it's sad how it saddens me, and it's very sad how cops have no respect for our gender pronouns, no respect for our name, no respect for our transhumanity, and this saddens me. But it also reinforces my commitment and strength to support the work, and having politicians that recognize our communities and recognize that sex work is work and recognize our humanity is strengthening.
Thank you. Nuevamente, Jessica, tienes todo mi apoyo. No importa lo que los otros candidatos digan, aunque se cambien el nombre o el apellido a latino, no nos van a representar. Así que you have all my support, okay? I love you.
Jessica, you have all of my support, and it doesn't matter if our competitors rename themselves so that they have a Latina name. We will still see through that, and you have all my support.
Gracias, Danny. Thank you so much, and thank you, Laura, for jumping in. And we're gonna come back to you to talk more. I want to turn it over to Mohammed. Mohammed, you've been a longtime activist for immigrant LGBTQI communities and have been working very, very closely in specifically the Indo-Caribbean community in Queens. Can you paint a picture of what the issues are for the queer Caribbean community, what they face, and what's the activism that's led to the creation of the Caribbean Equality Project?
Okay. First, thank you, Jessica, for having me on this panel. Very similar to Queen's Pride, the Caribbean Equality Project was founded in response to anti-LGBTQ hate violence in Queens. My brother and I and my family are survivors of a hate crime that took place in Richmond Hill, Queens. And in that incident, cultural hate speech, particularly Caribbean cultural hate speech, was used. The words anti-man and batty boy, these are derogatory terms for LGBTQ people in the Caribbean. And in our case, those words were used against us, followed by physical violence. And when we reported this incident of violence, the NYPD didn't take us seriously. We were actually made fun of as we waited. My brother was on the ground. His head was bleeding, waiting for an ambulance. And in a moment of just trying to survive and trying to protect ourselves and holding ourselves safe, we realized that we were all alone. And we realized that how many of other Caribbean folks have experienced violence without speaking up or without having a network to support them. And it took us over a year and a half to heal from that incident. We went to the New York City Anti-Violence Project for counseling and legal support and media training. At the time, I did not have any formal media training, and doing interviews was very emotional, and I would just like break down because it was so traumatic. Um, but in 2015, we founded the Caribbean Equality Project, and today, this year is our 5th anniversary. We are celebrating 5 years of organizing and mobilization of Caribbean LGBTQ plus community members in New York City. And in addition to just being a queer Muslim Indo-Caribbean person, the Caribbean Equality Project also represents Afro-Caribbean LGBTQ folks as well, where the organization itself serves as this intersectionality of queerness and transness and Caribbeanness, and what all of that represents for us as immigrants. And majority of our work right now is responding to the economic needs of our community. We started a COVID-19 emergency relief fund back in March, and we said we were going to raise $5,000. We weren't necessarily sure how many people was going to reach out to us. As of today, we have over 90 community members that have reached out to us for support. We have distributed over $15,000 in cash assistance to community members to help with food assistance, to help with rent assistance. In addition to rent, we're also doing rent negotiation. Our top priority is making sure our undocumented and asylum Caribbean immigrants are not being thrown out or being harassed. So we're also offering to rent negotiate with landlords to let them know that this organization is willing to support this community member for the next 3 months. And this is our way of keeping our community safe. And I'm so glad that Danny's on here, because I did a live recently, and I've also talked about how in the many ways that government have sort of failed immigrants, right? Undocumented immigrants through this entire process, from not creating materials in various languages so we can have language access, to creating a stimulus package where undocumented LGBTQ folks could have sustainability and not only worry about income, but also just worry about safety and worry about housing. But for many of us that have been on the front lines, we always knew we were essential workers. We always knew we were frontline workers. We always knew that our community organizations are actually what's keeping us safe. But it's also a testament of the work that needs to be done on a government level, on a city level, a state level, and most definitely on a federal level, to make sure that immigrants in this country are not only protected, but are also respected in a very dignified way. And through the work that many of us, with my colleagues that are on this panel, BNA and Danielle, we're seeing and we're supporting our community and meeting them where they are. In regards to violence, so many immigrants that are experiencing hate violence are not coming forward. They don't have the support system to come forward to seek assistance. Many of these folks are choosing between their own trauma and staying in a home that's also homophobic and transphobic. And because of that, they're not reporting the violence that they're experiencing. I've seen it within the Caribbean communities in Queens and Brooklyn. Many of the survivors are telling me that I cannot be kicked out. If I come forward as a survivor of hate violence, my family is going to find out. I'm going to be outed, and I'm not ready. I'm not emotionally prepared to deal with family rejection. And this is a very real scenario and a real fear for a lot of Caribbean immigrants, particularly those that are already fleeing violence from the Caribbean, places like Jamaica and Trinidad and Guyana, where I'm from. The community that's coming to us are finding us on social media. They're sending us DMs. I'm coming. I'm going to be at JFK. I'm going to be couch surfing for a few weeks, but can you connect me to a shelter where I can stay? I need to meet with a lawyer. I need to tell my story. I need to get legal representation. And this is the work that the Caribbean Equality Project has been doing for the past 5 years. From 2017 to now, we have successfully won 22 asylum cases for our community members. And we're doing this without providing direct services, right? We're doing this through a referral process and sending our clients to the New York City Anti-Violence Project or the Brooklyn Defenders or Immigration Equality. But now we're hearing from these partners and saying that there's a real need within the Caribbean immigrant community for immigration services, and the Caribbean Equality Project should explore what funding looks like to support this organization to do this work instead of referring it back to other agencies, other larger agencies with more funding and more staff. So I'm gonna leave it there for now, and I'm sure you have more questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mohammed. I think what's common with all our stories and all our experiences is that Audre Lorde said, we do not live, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives. And I think for us, particularly here in Queens and Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst, Corona, Woodside, Richmond Hill area, immigration is so centered to the challenges and barriers that we all experience. And it's so critical that we bring that lens of intersectionality to all the activism that we do. And it's really also about power building, right? It's not, like you said, it's not just service, right? It's like, how are we really supporting our community in order for them to thrive, right? And become really powerful agents in their communities. Talking about, well, I also want to add, if folks have questions as we're talking, please feel free to hit the chat button and ask the questions. And we also have someone sort of monitoring the Facebook feed. So if there's questions there, we'll get them as well. It's a little bit of a delay though. But I want to turn it over to you, Danielle. You've also been a very long time local activist right here in our community around LGBTQIA issues, around immigration, right? And most recently, you've been working on issues on behalf of like the senior and elder community. Can you share some of the most pressing issues our queer community has faced, you know, both locally and amongst seniors and elders in our community?
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here, Jessica, today. I echo the support of my comrades in the panel. We're very excited for you, and thank you so much for putting this together. I think that this is one of the first intentionally diverse LGBT panels that are continuously talking about the issues that our communities are facing with people that also have decision-making power and influence decision-making, like Danny Dromm and the work of Biane through Make the Road and Mohammed through the Equality Project. And so it's an honor to be here sharing space with everyone, and thank you so much. And we're really excited to have you represent us and be my next assembly member. So, you know, I think that one of the common thread in today's conversation and kind of like the historical context is this context of violence, context of violation of human rights, but also context of not having a safety net here in the district that is solely focusing on providing LGBTQ affirming services that is well funded and that has different sources of institutional support so that it's actually able to function in a sustainable way and stay in place as an LGBT specific service agency. We have expanded recently, Danny Dromm supported and worked very closely to bring in the LGBT network into our neighborhood, and we're very happy to have them here. They're expanding programming and services, and this is kind of like one tier of the gap that our district has faced for decades. So by the LGBT Center, the LGBT network coming into Queens is part of the solution, but it's not a long-term solution, right? As an activist, a lot of my work is through not-for-profit sectors, but it's also outside of that context because, like my colleagues shared, there's a limitation to what you do and how you navigate those spaces, especially when programs and vital survival services are funded through government or foundations that require very rigid outcomes performance. And so, you know, I think that one of the main issues is making sure that locally as a district, we build sustainable agencies through non-traditional funding sources that aligned LGBT communities in this specific borough, in this specific community, that are undocumented, that are from different cultural backgrounds, that are escaping violence for various reasons, violence that are directly affecting them or indirectly affecting them and putting them in danger. The other contextual aspect of violence is welfare inequality, access to jobs, access to a sustainable welfare for you and your family, whether that's chosen family or whether that's your family, blood family. And so by introducing these pieces of laws and lobbying for gender and for employment discrimination acts, this is great and it's part of the work, and I condemn a lot of the work that Danny has done as an out LGBT council member to do this, but we need more. We need more training. We need more infrastructure to make sure that our communities are entering the job market, those who wish to enter the job market in a safe way, and those who are doing non-traditional employment like sex work have the skills and safety net to be able to exercise their work in a safe space. So there's a huge financial historical gap as well. And because of those two, the history on violence, the history on inequality in terms of livable wages and welfare, we result into a population like older adult populations that for many years have lived under or below poverty lines, that have maintained their apartments in a community that is being gentrified. And because of the lack of infrastructure that our buildings have for people to age in place, railroad, accessible entryways, lack of elevators in some of our buildings, landlord harassment to evict long-term residents so that they could market price their apartments to the market rate. This puts LGBT older adults specifically in danger because their income is not as high as someone who had a profession, working as a doctor or working as what we would call a traditional professional with a retirement plan of 401k. And these are people that have lived day by day, which is a lot of the community that Diane represents through her work with the transgender community. So right now we really need to look at how all of these three different pieces that seem so different but are so interconnected, how they come together. How do we make sure that organizations like the like Mohammed's organization is well funded so that his work is not tied to big institutions like the New York City Anti-Violence Project that limits referrals. Like I worked in non-for-profit. I know what non-for-profit is, and I know the capacity that non-for-profits have. And so how do we make sure that these organizations are sustainable so that they're able to do their work? How do we make sure that we're also understanding that hate violence is a systematic failure that comes based on the lack of infrastructure around imposing non-discriminatory and non-biased discrimination policies in institutions of power, in government, within the NYPD, and make it mandatory for anyone providing general customer service, anyone, any shop, any establishment, any organization that is coming in contact with people need to know how to work with LGBT people to combat the violence that we're hearing about today. And lastly, this concept of affordable and affordable housing for LGBT seniors was something that I recently embarked on, and through my work, people are moving for all of the reasons that I mentioned previously: landlord harassment, not being able to pay the rent. But people are also moving because there's a gap in community and community services. And so we don't have a system that is citywide, aside from SAGE and Griot Circle, that are only 2 agencies in New York City servicing LGBT older people, being intentional about having conversations about aging in place, providing alternatives like LGBT welcoming senior housing development to assure that our communities are having an ecosystem of infrastructure to survive, to stay in their communities, and to be able to live a dignified life. And so, you know, I think that as we move forward in kind of like understanding the commitment that we have as a community, understanding the commitment that we intersect with, you know, politicians and city agency, is really moving forward some key pieces of legislation that I understand that some sit on the city level, others sit at the state level. And I just wanted to, you know, like propose some policy solutions that I think would really help us continue and bring these conversations together through a policy lens. So there's currently the state holds a couple of bills on the floor supported by members of different committees. And I wanted to highlight the long-term care bill of rights, the elder rent increase exception, the LGBT competency met professionals training, the New York Division of Human Rights to get anti-bias trainings, the health aid nurses LGBT competency, and the SOGI data collection pieces that are currently on the floor, which allows us to, you know, enforce that agencies that are responsible for providing services do not produce violence while providing these services. For example, Mohammed speaks about his experience and his family's experience seeking support from the NYPD, and the NYPD doing nothing but ignoring their requests and their need. Vianney speaks about the historical context of the NYPD, the 110th and 115th precincts that have a historical context of violence against transgender women. Vianney and I both received calls from transgender women saying, I called the cops and the cops threw hot coffee at me, or the cops would drive around making fun of us or sexually harass us. And so really making sure the training is a big part on how we get services which combat, you know, discriminatory policies and violence. And then lastly, you know, there's LGBT people exist for corporations on LGBT Pride Month as a marketing solution for their inclusivity and diversity landscape. LGBT people are part of conversations when it comes to city agencies and elected officials to show diversity and to show inclusion and to show that LGBT people exist. But we still don't have people in power, elected officials in power, taking their advocacy out of their mouths to the next step and saying, how are we going to make sure that DFTA, the Department of Aging, that the health department, that the education department, that all of these systems that are set up to provide us an ecosystem of support and survival are capturing the data of the people that exist, that are LGBT New Yorkers. And lastly, I think that is very important to highlight the importance of radical electoral bodies, right? This means we need to make sure that elected officials or candidates are not doing behind the doors handshaking with developers and for-profit real estate companies that really have a direct impact in low-income communities and indulge violence, police surveillance, which leads to a lot of the problems that we're seeing today that are no different than the problems that we've seen historically when it comes to LGBT people. I'm sorry that I was so long. I'll leave it at that, and I'm very happy to be here sharing space with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. You always keep it real, and that's why I love you. I thank you for all that. It's really, really important. As we think about, I mean, even for me, someone who is raising her hand to run for office and wants to really be the best advocate I can, right? You all have to hold me accountable, right? Because you know, you're entrusting in me and supporting me, and I want to make sure I'm doing right by the community in a way that's ethical and authentic and really lifts up the experiences from the community. So we only have like 8 minutes left, but there's a couple of questions about sex work. So I want to turn it back over to Bianne. Can you explain, I'm not going to say word for word the question, but can you just explain what decriminalizing sex work looks like and means, like if it say it happens, like what does it mean for the sex worker community? Why is that better than what's proposed oftentimes than the Nordic model, where they go after the demand versus the sex workers themselves? So can you just explain what that looks like, so people really understand why decriminalization is so important?
Yeah, so básicamente por generaciones hemos visto que el trabajo sexual ha existido, ¿verdad? So, entonces no es un tema que recientemente vamos a empezar a hablar. Sobre la despenalización del trabajo sexual es algo nuevo que está pasando en la ciudad de Nueva York y en el estado de Nueva York. So,
Sex work has been around for sex work is not new. Sex work has been around for generations. In terms of the criminalization of sex work, that is a different story.
So básicamente en Albany lo que se está pasando ahorita, hay diferentes formas de descriminalizar el trabajo sexual, ¿verdad? So, entonces, las noticias han estado en ocasiones mandando un mensaje positivo sobre la despenalización del trabajo sexual. Muchos también están mandando mensaje ¿cómo se dice? De hacerlo legal, ¿verdad? La situación en este momento...
Basically, in Albany, there are different methods to decriminalization, decriminalization of sex work. And the news has been sending positive messages about decriminalization.
Entonces, lo que está pasando en Albany, tenemos muchas piezas de legislaciones que queremos pasar, ¿verdad? Pero una de las cosas que son importantes en este momento es lo de el caminar como trans o de walking while trans, ¿ven? So, básicamente, en la ciudad de Nueva York, principalmente en Jackson Heights, en Roosevelt Avenue, cualquier mujer trans que camine por Roosevelt Avenue puede ser arrestada o criminalizada simplemente por el hecho de caminar sexy, por utilizar tacones, por tener el cabello largo, bonito, vestirse sexy. Puede ser una forma de criminalizar a una persona.
There are many pieces of legislation that we're supporting, and once piece of legislation specifically walking while trans, like taking into account the fact that on Roosevelt in Jackson Heights, just walking with heels on, looking good, looking sexy, can be criminalized.
Estamos hablando sobre muchas personas están en contra de despenalizar el trabajo sexual porque va a traer más, más personas van a ser traficadas, etcétera, etcétera. Yo como sobreviviente de tráfico humano te podría decir que la despenalización del trabajo sexual abriría una puerta para las personas que están sufriendo este tipo de violencia o que están siendo traficadas, se sentirían más cómodas yendo a los precintos a hacer una denuncia pública sin miedo de que te agrisen de ser una persona que está haciendo trabajo sexual, sin miedo a que te arresten, sin miedo a que te deporten.
Many folks are against the decriminalization. That they feel that it'll result in more human trafficking. But I can tell you that as a survivor of human trafficking, it would open doors. It would open doors for folks to not suffer. It would make it better and easier for folks who suffer crimes to go to the public, to report it, and to live without fear, to do and live their lives without fear.
So tenemos el caso, por ejemplo, de la chica que estaba, en en un salón donde se hacían masajes, que el simplemente hecho de que tenía miedo de ser arrestada, de ser deportada, brincó del segundo piso de donde ella estaba y desafortunadamente falleció. Ese es el tipo de miedo que nuestra comunidad está viviendo constantemente por el simplemente hecho de vestirte sexy, de expresar tu género, puede ser criminalizada y hasta deportada.
One example in one specific case is of a person who worked at a massage parlor, and because of the fear and the weight of the fear against being arrested and the fear of being deported and the fear of the consequences of expressing one's gender, of living one's truth, then this person jumped from their tall story building, and unfortunately they did not survive that jump, and that's an example of the reality of the fear that our community lives every day.
Yeah, so basando un poquito a lo que está, muchos están pensando también en criminalizar a las personas que compran el sexo, ¿verdad? So, entonces, mujeres trans como por ejemplo yo, que dependemos o muchas personas dependen del trabajo sexual que estamos haciendo, porque como mencionó Daniel Puerto, no hay trabajos para mujeres trans. Tú vas a un empleo, llevas tu hoja de resumen, de trabajo, y no te dan un empleo simplemente por el hecho del aspecto que tú tienes o de la forma en que te vistes. No te ofrecen un empleo. So, entonces la única forma que te toca para sobrevivir es hacer trabajo sexual.
Yes, there's talk of criminalizing buyers, and I think that one thing that I can tell you as a trans woman and for folks like me, that there isn't a space for us to just go and apply for a job because of who we are and the experiences we have, and the reality is that we just cannot just assimilate into regular, quote unquote, regular society.
So, entonces, es muy fácil decir las mujeres trans solamente se dedican a hacer trabajo sexual. Lo he escuchado muchas veces, pero nadie dice vamos a darle un empleo a mujeres trans. Nadie dice voy a ofrecerle un trabajo de mesera a una mujer trans. Nadie dice eso. So, entonces, ya basta de utilizar palabras que lastiman a las personas que hacen trabajo sexual y ofrecerles un empleo, porque muchas mujeres trans que tú les preguntas, ¿quieres seguir haciendo trabajo sexual? Ellas te dicen, no, ya no quiero hacer trabajo sexual, quiero un empleo normal. Pero desafortunadamente la sociedad no te lo va a ofrecer si nosotros no seguimos con esa, creando visibilidad y conciencia sobre el trabajo sexual.
It's easy to say, like, why don't you just leave it? But the reality is that no one is saying, hey, here's a job. No one is saying, let's create jobs, other outlets, or hey, here's an offer to be a waitress without it's. And we have to stop using terminology that hurts our communities, and recognize that society won't offer us solutions if we don't continue to fight to make the truth about being a sex worker and living a life of dignity a priority and part of the conversation politically.
Yeah, last word. Creo que todas las personas que están corriendo como oficiales electos en la ciudad de Nueva York, en el estado de Nueva York, tienen que entender que el trabajo sexual es un trabajo y que no es fácil hacerlo.
Politicians have to understand that sex work is work and that it is not easy to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, BNA. Gracias, Laura. We're actually at time, and I'm so sad because I have so many more questions, and there was a few more questions in the chat, but it is 9 o'clock, and I want to honor everyone's time. I would love to do something like this in the future when I'm elected, continue this conversation, engage the community, right? There's a lot of learning that still needs to happen, but a lot of advocacy that we need to move forward, right? And the word for me that I hold dear is the word dignity, because I want to create a society where all people can live their lives with dignity. So thank you all. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, BNA. Thank you, Danny Dromm, for the work you do to fight for dignity for our communities, and to be at the forefront of activism for you know, equity, dignity, and justice for our LGBTQIA communities. And I wish you all I don't know, happy pride, joyful pride, but also a meaningful and just pride, because that's what we got to continue to fight for. So
Jessica, before we go,
sure.
I just want to say how vitally important it is to the LGBT community that we elect Jessica Gonzalez-Rojas to the Assembly. Nobody else will fight harder than Jessica for our community in Albany. So please, please, we need help. We need volunteers. I really need a partner in Albany who will work with me as one of the first openly gay elected officials here in the borough of Queens. I couldn't say more strongly, please get out, help Jessica, get on the phone, do what we have to do to make sure that she's elected. Voting is going to start, paper ballots are going to start coming in about 2 weeks. So people will be making this decision very, very soon. The primary is on June 23rd, but people will begin voting beforehand. So there's no time left to fool around, but we definitely have to get out and support Jessica in the next few weeks. So please, folks, stay in touch with us and make sure that we do all we can to get Jessica elected to the New York State Assembly.
Thank you, Danny. I appreciate that. And one thing that it's an exciting opportunity to get on the phone with us, do phone banking in this moment where we can't knock on doors. Tiffany Caban is hosting a phone bank rally next Tuesday from 6 to 8 on June 2nd. Wow, June 2nd. So we invite everyone to participate and call our neighbors and let them know about this election and how important it is to elect a real, true progressive to the New York State Assembly. So thank you all so much for having me. Mia just put it in the chat, the phone bank information, but if you're on our email list or check our Twitter, Facebook or Instagram, we'll continue to promote that opportunity. So, gracias, Danielle, Mohammed, Vianney, Danny, thank you, thank you, thank you. And let's keep fighting.
On to victory.
On to victory. Buenas noches a todos.